have lots of great things. We're not picking them up.
Good afternoon and welcome to our special council meeting and workshop. Roll call shows that all members are present except for Councilor Bertha Sell. Maybe joining us via Zoom at some point. And we'll start with our special council meeting, a one-item agenda. Order 2293, order authorizing the purchase and installation of 8 BRS Pyramid Vehicle Repeater Systems and 5 mobile radio from Radio Communications Management, Inc. of Portland for a total expense of $28,777 to be drawn from the Police Asset Forfeiture Fund. I have a motion to approve, please.
So moved.
And the second? Second. Moved and seconded. Discussion. Sophie. What do you think?
I will take it. So we don't normally bring items to special meetings unless there's a special reason. In this case, we have earlier this month, we received some pretty significant complaints from police officers about the radio system not working, not getting their message to dispatch and vice versa. For those who are not aware, when there's only one officer on a scene somewhere or in the community patrolling, the radio system and communications is really a lifeline and critical for officer safety, but also to get help if they need help for the community. We had identified that our mobile radios, which would be the ones that are in vehicles, were getting quite old. Josh had actually started us on a plan a couple of years ago to replace the radios when we replaced the cruisers. Unfortunately, our path forward with vehicle purchases and time in general caught up with us a lot faster than we had anticipated. We have, so Penobscot County runs the regional communication center, but also the radio system that allows all of police, fire, and other emergency organizations to communicate. That's also an aging system. We've all been working together, and most recently they engaged a consultant to help them identify how to build the system, the budget for the system, and they've gone out to bond and borrowed the money to upgrade the regional system. Because that is in place, the communities that feed into that regional system also can access the consultant at the reduced rate that they essentially on the county's bid for services. So Chief Lowe and Dan, being the budget wizards that they are, did that and asked them to come up in hopes that they would look at our stuff and say, oh, there's an easy fix for that. You just tweak this or change this out and you'll be fine. Unfortunately, these radios and extenders, which are in the trunks that allow the communication from the radio to dispatch to be boosted, are really old, over 15 years apiece. They are no longer being made, but more importantly, they're no longer being supported. The factories phased out support of these units back in about 2013. So what we're suggesting is that we bring all of our cruisers up to snuff with a new mobile unit and a true repeater. So the extender allowed us to push our transmission out, but didn't help bring the transmission in. These repeaters that would go in now would actually help bring the transmission in as well. So it would truly be two-way communication most of the places in Orono. So when we looked at this, we have 3 of the newer mobile units, so we don't need to buy those. That's why we need 8 of the repeaters and 5 of the mobile units. The total for this all in installation included, all of the calibration included, is $28,777. We are suggesting that we use pretty much the balance of the police forfeiture fund to cover that. It would leave, if you chose to expend it that way, it would leave about $4,700 in that account.
Questions? I think good communication is essential in public safety.
Can I ask, is 4,700 or like close to 5,000, is that enough to leave? I mean, would that cause a hardship down the road?
So with that account, we put the money there. It has to be used for law enforcement.
Right.
And the council has consistently stayed in kind of the extra world of the things that we could do more for safety or more for community policing oriented activities. We used it for the cameras most recently to ensure accountability in the police department and good evidence collection. There is no minimum standard in that account. And unfortunately, given the activity that we're seeing, I would anticipate probably
I have some pending still.
some more money.
Okay. Yeah, no, I was just wondering if something came up that was urgent, that there might not be enough money left. But if there's more. I mean,
Questions or comments?
Seems like a good use for the funds.
You ready for a vote? All those in favor? 6 in favor, none opposed. So I guess we are ready to adjourn our special meeting. So I take a motion to adjourn the special council meeting. And the second? Second. All in favor of adjourning the special council meeting? And we will move into our budget workshop. Roll call for the budget workshop is the same as it was for the special meeting. All councilors are present except for Councilor Brotherstow. And we are going to begin with the review of some new material. I think you have passed that out to us, Sophie.
I have, and I've updated it, number one, so everybody can read it because it was really tiny last time. Also, I worked with Zach to make sure that we were comparing, this is around employee count, staffing level. One of the things that's difficult is this started as a chart looking at comparing employee counts on January 1st of each calendar year. We started talking about ins and outs and specifics where those decisions are made on the fiscal year. We have done our best. We went through here. We found some people had been counted twice. We found some people hadn't been counted. So we are doing our best. It is an approximation based on what we have funded in the fiscal year. So we've tried to take our employee count and then figure out how many positions were vacant at that time.
So this information was requested by a counselor, which I think is perfectly reasonable to look at how our staff has changed over time. I just begin by saying that having served on the council during every edition that's listed here, council discussed all of these, felt they were necessary based on service levels or state requirements or local ordinance. And that doesn't mean it can't be revisited, just that these were all decisions made by the council at that time and seems clearly justified at that point in time. So with that introduction, any comments or questions? Mr. Kenny?
If I could speak to the owl. I'm not trying to holler. Yeah, so the reason I asked for this is because of the 11% increase to our operating budget. My assumption being the vast majority of that is staffing, salary, benefits. And our typical increase to our operating budget has been around 3%. This is 11%, and it jumps off the paper at me. I am not comfortable with it. So that was the reason for asking. Um, I'm just seeing this now. I think since we started 2016, it shows increases. We have 16 increases, I think, since 2015, but I don't know that I see 16 in these numbers. So, but that's, I guess, not super relevant. And I understand what you're saying, Mr. Perry, that, you know, these are all things that have happened over time. I get that. But I think as a council, we need to be thinking about the big picture, which is that 11.3% increase to our operating budget. I don't know that we want to, I don't know how we operate, to be honest. I don't think we want to be in here tweaking numbers, and I'm not suggesting that we should be. But I think we should be looking at the big picture and having a discussion about that. And maybe it's just, I think I've heard it said around the table that kind of it is what it is, not, and so that's nothing we could do. I don't think that's necessarily accurate. I don't think that's doing what we should be doing. That's a big increase, and I remain really concerned about it.
So I haven't served on council quite as long as Tom, but since 2017. And here are some things that I know to be true about our staff situation. Apart from the fact that they're fabulous people and do a great job. Our staff members are consistently stretched thin and given responsibilities that are added on to their job descriptions. Many of our staff members, including especially our town manager, wear multiple job hats. We consistently fall short in terms of comparable pay in the region, yet we retain great staff members because people do like working in Orono. However, that's not necessarily ethical for us to keep people under market value. So we have a collection of staff that are stretched really, really thin with what the community is asking of them and what council is asking of them. We are not paying an exorbitant amount of money, not even close regionally, compared to other communities. And yet we have the numbers that we have. So when I look at this table, I see, yeah, okay, that is a big increase. However, the staff that we have, they're not being paid an exorbitant amount of money, and they're overburdened. So what that tells me is, if we're really looking at the big picture, we're not looking at this table, we're looking at the service level. Because that is exactly what we would have to, it's not as simple as to say, well, 11% and this many extra people, let's cut some people, or let's cut people's salaries. That the big picture is to look at what these people are doing. And that is the service level. And so what I've learned every year that I've been on council and gone through this budget process since 2017 is that the service level that we currently operate at is what the community demands. And if we want to have a conversation about reducing 11%, that's a conversation about removing services from the community. That's a conversation we're supposed to be having. And for me, that's a conversation that is already built into the budget process. Every single department we review, our goal this year, like every other year, is to talk about the service level and whether there are going to be any reductions. So I guess, like, I appreciate looking at this big picture and keeping it in mind, but also we are already looking at the service level, which is what would have to change in order to change any of these numbers.
Can I say to that, and thank you, Megan, I think that also there's a historical context that is missing from this too. This is a slice of what we look at, and we just went through a pandemic, we just went through COVID. The country has raised its rates. We've gone from $7.25 an hour to $15 an hour to be, not to be competitive, but so people can live and eat and all of that stuff. So all of those, so the jumps that I see are because if they're a sign of the times. more than anything. I mean, everything is going up, everything is going up, and you know that. And so, so taking what, what Megan said is the service level, but also we are in a time frame of we've got to spend more money on operations. We have to, because otherwise it's not just the services, but people can't afford to live unless we coordinate or collaborate or raise the rates or raise the
Well-
pay. or
And I
whatever.
just want to also quickly add that several of these departments, those staff increases were about safety as well. Fire department, public safety, public works. So a number of those additions were actually about the safety of the staff working as well.
I appreciate those comments. I don't know what you've looked at in the past or recently with regards to us being grossly underpaying. Maybe you've seen all that data, I've not seen it presented. And certainly, I want to make sure we're paying our employees a fair wage. And I know personally from friends who are police officers specifically that is a tough gig right now. And I think we've lost probably partially because of that. We've had people come in and go. So I understand the challenges. And we can paint the picture that everyone is spread thin, and I'm not suggesting that people aren't working hard, but we have gained 16 positions in 7 years. So if we're stretched thin now, these people from 2015 must have really been standing on their heads. Or
We've increased services.
we're still doing fairly similar services, I assume.
I mean, I'm not prepared to give like a presentation on it or anything at the moment, but we have added services. Again, partly for some of these departments, there are safety concerns. Like when we talk about public works, we had to talk about plowing in specific and having a system where we weren't having people operate a plow truck after being awake for 30 hours. And similarly with the fire department, we've been struggling to find a balance where we're appropriately staffing those shifts and also accounting for the fact that people do need days off or they'll burn out. And if somebody gets sick, we can't operate. We've been struggling in that regard. So some of these positions were literally so that we can continue to provide safe services where no one's going to get hurt. But there are also community requests and service level expectations that have risen in this time period.
I just see if other councils have any questions or comments.
I just did a very quick back of the envelope look at, and I haven't sat with them for very long, but if you look up our historical census data, our population's grown somewhere between 20 and 25% since 2000. Our staffing levels have grown about 17%. I think what hasn't grown is our tax base. And so what I don't feel uncomfortable having the size staff that we have. I feel really uncomfortable continuing to grow staff when we're not able to increase the amount of revenue that we bring. So I don't have any problem with the job that our town staff does now. And I agree with Megan that people have an idea of the service level that they want to receive in Orono that is higher than many equivalent towns, but I would caution that there's not a lot of room to grow. So I'd like to have a little bit more time to do some numbers, but it seems like they're tracking together. But what is lacking is our ability to grow our revenue along with our population.
I think everybody accused of being fiscally conservative.
Same.
But I actually, I find this 11% increase also very concerning. And I think right now, a lot of this process is felt, I think we're all asking good questions. It also feels like we're basically rubber stamping this as we're going and not really seriously asking questions about the service level, which I think you're right. If we were to reduce anything, I'm not really interested in positions. But I think taking another look at what services we're providing, what will we find? I mean, it's hard to say what's possible. I mean, people do expect a lot of really high quality service, and Orono does provide it. I appreciate that. So I don't really have anything substantive to say, except that I share your concern, and I'm not sure exactly what to do about it yet.
Well, every year I end up making some sort of frustrated speech at the end, although revenue sharing has gotten better. But to me, it really is a question of increased revenue. And at the local level, we are having a very hard time figuring out how to do that with only half of our land value being taxable.
Yep.
And so that has been a struggle. And for me, I've always kind of said this at the end of budget season to the public of, listen, I understand that you want to be angry perhaps at us for the tax rate. Totally get that, comes with the job. You want to stop me at ampersand and yell at me while I'm getting my coffee. That's what I signed up for. However, you also could direct your voice out of Orono towards places where revenue might come from, because we're having a really hard time scratching it up at the local level.
One point to that, obviously, is this year that's increased by 800,000. So
Yeah.
that's,
Yes.
you may not get to say that this year.
Well,
But you can say it,
well,
but it may not be accurate. That's another thing. I think we want to
So I
address this.
would like to move on to our workshop, but I will say that I do share the concern of 11%. Because we've gone through the budget, we've identified a few places where we might be able to use our ARPA funds to reduce local tax requirement. I've spoken with Sophie about looking at some of these salary increases to see if those might be able to rework somewhat, reduce that demand. And I think when we get to the end, well, we might make some changes along the way. If we're not comfortable with the amount of money that's required locally, then we say to our town manager, this is the number that we're comfortable with. Give us some recommendations as to how we can reach that number. And we've done that in the past, and we've got some good information back. Some of it we didn't want to do.
Mhm.
But I think that's certainly in a direction we can move in.
That again, is why I'm bringing it up. I don't know what the process is, and stuff is evolving as we speak, and we're not seeing that real time. So we don't, I don't know what's changed already. So, but I feel like I have to bring this
Oh, I
up
think
because
it's bringing
where
it.
it troubles me greatly. So I appreciate us having a dialogue. So thank you.
I wouldn't be comfortable letting jobs come back.
Let's, so unless you have anything else to add to this particular discussion, let's move on to the workshop.
Belle, can you bring up the presentation? Well, good evening. This is the public safety night. And for folks who aren't aware, in Orono, public safety means public safety administration, police department, community policing, which is a subset of the police department, the fire department, which includes emergency medical services and public health, hazardous material response, and fire protection. So we're gonna flip the page and start with public safety administration. The way I have this one set up is a little bit of an overview at the front. Then we're gonna flip the page and go into the breakdown of the budget. And that's a great time, I think, for questions. This is a lot of material, and I don't want to lose opportunities to flag things if you want to talk about them. So our public safety administration has 2 full-time administrative support professionals. They deal with reporting and compliance issues. So our accreditation in the police department is supported a great deal by one of those individuals, and the Medicare reporting piece is supported by the other. Program support, so they literally support. In the fire department, we have captains that work every fourth day, so they keep the projects and the programs kind of moving ahead. Support both the deputy fire chief who does operations, day-to-day operations, and the public safety director who's doing larger picture items. We also have significant community programs, outreach in the police department, Tippecanoe, and car seat program, which we just had this chamber packed with 30 people from all over the state learning how to put car seats in for 4 days, but they've got it. The basic administrative assistance, so when you call, you get a real live person on the phone. Billing and collections, so public safety, specifically the fire department, EMS, and the police department parking and fines enforcement bring in a considerable amount of over-the-counter revenue. So both of these folks are responsible as the front lines to make sure the information that comes to finance and our collectors is maintained in the way it should be. And one of our individuals is really new, but the other one who's been here for a while is actually cross-trained to support other departments. We had an absence downstairs, or we decided to try to take advantage, I think, of some budget savings one year and actually brought her over here for 20 hours a week. The police department began to fall behind, so we've altered that to be that she fills in when needed. So if I have somebody who is out down front, she can wait the counter like she's a pro. And which is important because down front, I have to have 2 people in order to be open to the public for cash handling purposes. Next slide. So this budget has a total budget of $143,000. The increase in FY23 is $22,700. The program, $21,000 of that is due to personnel expense, but $16,700 of that was an election when we hired a new employee. We weren't paying any health insurance, and then we had to just an election choice. Supplies and maintenance are up about $8,000. I'm sorry, about $940. That is based on the increase we're seeing in the cost of supplies, but also getting supplies here, as well as $640 difference in an estimated copier lease that came in a little bit more than what we had anticipated. That is public safety.
Any questions on public safety?
Are all our copiers from the same vendor, so we get as much of a bulk rate as possible?
No. But the ones in this complex are, when Lori went out, she tried the same vendor, which didn't give her as good a deal as a copy did. And so we always go with the low rate. I hope Transco will come in next time and be sharpen their pencils a little bit more, which would be great.
The police department copier or the public safety copier actually went with a copy because when we did the 2 bids, a copy came in lower. So we ask for bids when the leases are up and we go with whoever is lowest.
Thanks, Bill.
Ready to move on to the police? So in the police department, we have 13 sworn patrol officers. That includes the captain and the deputy chief. We do response 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We do internal investigation and case preparation, community services and events, parking permits and enforcement. We also hold the animal control officer and shelter contract arrangements in this department. Those are both statutorily required. When I first got here, I thought at that point, I think it was $7,000 or $6,000 a year for a shelter contract was so expensive. We went to Bangor Humane Society and found out it was about 4 times that. So we really love the Old Town Animal Orphanage and will support them.
Question. This says 15 and that says 13.
So Dan counted the 2 that are in community policing, which we'll get to next.
Which are sworn officers.
They are. And this also, in this department budget, you'll see the 4 frontline cruisers, the 2 administrative vehicles, because we expect our deputy chief and our captain to make emergency response after hours. And 1 training vehicle that goes back and forth. We almost always have somebody at the academy, unfortunately, and it's a lot cheaper for us to put them in one of our cars as opposed to paying 58.5 cents a mile to back and forth from the academy. And then we have the detectives vehicle. We also use that training vehicle to fill in when we have accidents or breakdowns in other vehicles. The detectives vehicle has been known to fly into the rotation as well. But all of these vehicles are set up for response. So when we look, next slide, when we look at the police department budget, whoops, did you go one too many or did I accidentally delete a slide? There we go. So the police department budget is $1,531,580. 1.34 million of that is related to personnel. That is an estimate. We are still in the middle of trying to settle the union contract with regard to law enforcement. Training and accreditation is very important in this department. We actually reduced this last year when we gave up our national accreditation under the CALIA and moved to the main MLEAP, Main Law Enforcement Accreditation Program, which took that price from about $8,000 a year down to about $3,000 a year. This also includes training. This line is up some based upon the, our training line is up about $3,600 based upon the fact that we are turning over people faster than we normally have. And when somebody comes in, there is an awful lot of training that goes into making them ready to be on our streets. The other issue that we're finding is we used to be able to bring even people in without any experience, immediately put them through, they would come ready to be like a reserve officer, even though we don't use them. And they could go on the streets, get a little bit of field training time, and then they go off to the academy and come back all trained. Now, we just hired somebody that we had to put through the second half of the introductory training, which we wouldn't have had to do in the past because people would come with that. And this individual is 133 on the list for the Maine Criminal Justice Academy's August class, which means we're probably going to be lucky if we can get him into the January class. So when people are with us on the streets with other officers, granted, we don't let them do it by themselves, they need a little bit more training during that field time. And oftentimes we're trying to find outside resources to do that for them. Our equipment line is up 3,000 of that increase, which is probably the most significant, is related to firearms and ammunition. Ammunition prices went up significantly in the last year, but we're also hiring more people, and every time you hire new people, you have to take them to the range and qualify them. And while it would be nice if we could qualify them with 6 shots, it's not. It is a significant amount of shooting, and you have to go through it multiple times to be able to demonstrate accuracy. If we do not qualify them with a certified firearms instructor, we would be negligent and be breaking all sorts of Maine Criminal Justice Academy rules that would set us up for very bad circumstances in the future. Gasoline, we do a lot of patrolling. We like to get out there in the community like everybody else. They are seeing the hit here with a $9,000 increase in gasoline, which is a 35% increase. Routine maintenance is up about $1,000. That is simply a reflection of what we're seeing in terms of increased costs of parts and labor. And we keep trying to figure out a way to get police and fire into the public works garage more, but with only 1 mechanic, we're just not able to do that. Any questions about police?
We currently fully staffed. Oh, they short one.
I'm short of one. I just had one start today, actually. It's what we spoke about. He graduated class on Friday. It allows me to be part-time certified. I actually spent the afternoon out to the range with him this afternoon. So I'm hiring for one right now. And I just had one graduate the academy Friday too. Just starting his first shift this afternoon too. So that's good. That helps.
So that 15 are positions, with 1 missing, or 15 are people?
No, that's
Gonna be 16.
positions. No, that's
So it's gonna be
positions.
15 once we have the.
15 is full up with the 2 community police. Yep. 15 is full staff.
And we would normally see, I think, pretty much routinely down 1. And in this past year and a half, we've been down as many as,
I think I went down. I was pretty
4 or
low. I was
5.
like 4 or 5 in November. It was real thin. in November.
Yeah.
So being down 1, how do we cover staffing? Is that add to our overtime or do we just reduce coverage?
so there's some overtime expense, but not like in the fire department, because Captain LaJoy and Dan, before he became the deputy chief, they look at the schedule, and we're able to move that schedule around more and drop down on nights that are not quite as historically busy as other nights. If there are times like outside of the regular school year, we maybe don't need 4 people on a Thursday night, so we might just drop 1 there.
Oh, it does look as though, given this past year's budget, they were still significantly over budget as far as unscheduled overtime is concerned.
So this past year, when you're down 5, you can't really drop.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can, I think we can manage 1 with fewer blips. The other thing that we're seeing, and I think it's just a different approach in the work environment. I don't think it's specific to Orono, but the workforce is really enjoying paid time off. The workforce is really understanding that when their spouse or they have a baby, they can stay out for longer. For a long time in the municipal world, if your spouse was having a baby, you might take a shift or 2 off. And now we're not seeing that. So we're seeing bigger gaps of time, even with people who are here.
I've seen this, I mean, you've talked a little bit about this increase in training wages, but this increase in the projected budget doesn't seem to reflect the use even with that. And I mean, this past year, we budgeted for $25,000. To date, we've only used 11,000 in training wages. And so curious, even the year before that, we still only used 12,000. So is the training costs, are they going up that drastically?
So I don't think it's just cost. I think in the past, prior to the pandemic, a lot of the training that we want our folks to have is not offered in the state of Maine. So we travel for best practice training. So a good example would be my police chief and captain should be going to the International Police, the IACP, which is the even though they say international, it's really the National Police Chiefs Association, and one that when the prior chief went to those conferences, he brought back incredible best practice, especially in areas that departments in Maine might not be focusing on quite as much. Community policing was one, officer safety. It's where we implemented our fitness and mental health requirements to try to get officers to sit down with professionals, because we had that started before the PTSD trend really started ticking up. So those are things that we find FBI LEADA, which is a supervisory leadership program, the National Police Academy, places like that. Those training opportunities are expensive, but they pay dividends and have really helped us stay at the cutting edge. When we talk about the Criminal Justice Academy, the tuition for that is minimal, which is what will come out of that training line.
I guess I'm still not quite understanding then why we're budgeting for so much. I mean, it seems like is our use increasing that drastically? Or, I mean, not increasing. I mean, we're keeping the same budget as last year, even though even the year before that, we still used less than half of it, or about half of that.
Do you want to talk about what you're bringing in?
So I think one, isn't that where the contractual requirement for training comes from as well?
No.
It isn't. Okay. So we are looking at upping our training this year. There's a couple of different areas. Number one is with community policing aspect. And we're going to get into community policing in a second, but it's necessary to have some of those funds in there. We'll talk about it in a little bit. The other thing is, as we're growing out, we're looking at mental health training. So we have the NAMI, the National Mental Health Group, coming in. Some of that will be to cover the officers, especially the new ones who haven't had any of it yet. There's actually joint training for fire and law enforcement coming in. The second thing is we're really pushing for our leadership group, our sergeants and our captains, or sergeants and our captain, to go out and get some additional training as it relates to topics such as social justice, how to deal with de-escalating situations beyond the NAMI training, and those types of things. We're also encouraging the younger officers that don't have their associate's degrees yet to go forward and get some of that training through the associate's programs. They can start to develop more of their critical skills, critical thinking rather, and that type of stuff. So in the past, we have been, I don't want to say weak in encouraging training, but that's where we've been. And we're moving for a better educated organization, if you will. And that's really what is driving most of that increase that you see there.
So just as an example, one of the things that we had put in the budget for last year was drug recognition training. We, especially as marijuana and other drugs are marijuana has become recreational, it can still be impairing. There is no test for it. So you have to go through a drug recognition. We used to have more drug recognition officers, trained officers, but that has gone as we have filtered through and people have left. That training alone is $4,000. We were able to send somebody with a grant this year to Jacksonville to get that training, but it is not something that we would expect to get, and we need at least one more, if not two, drug recognition experts. Not just for us, but if you look at the region, we kind of have different experts in different places. We happen to do a lot of the drug recognition stuff here because we have been kind of singled out by the state as having very high alcohol, DUI, and driving while under the influence. But in other places, they have the K-9 or they have, different, so we're trying to kind of break that up and train to what the region and the department needs here. This is also in our plan for the coming year. We used to have a department that was almost all trained with the civil rights training. We now are starting at square zero with all of these new folks that haven't had it yet. So we're gonna have to cycle people through that as well.
Very informative. Thank you.
Can I ask you, is the NAMI training for mental health, is it for the officers or is it for the officers to recognize a mental health incident? I see it.
It's for them to recognize a mental health incident and to give them some skills to be able to de-escalate or cope with some of those things. So we're actually, it's primarily a law enforcement program, but we're going to be putting our EMS providers through it as well.
Right, good. No, that's good. Thank you.
Heck, our administrative folks are,
We're doing,
front desk folks are going through a similar training, not as specific, but. So, the vehicle expense, it continues to increase, and part of that is because we have the aging fleet. And our professional services, 100% of that is the cost of the 2 crossing guards. One that is stationed at the traffic light on Pine Street and one that is at Westwood. The RSU 26 reimburses us 50% of our actual costs. So you see that as a revenue in the revenue budget of 50% of this expense.
So if Officer Leslie or the other policing department officer were to cover a shift, or actual revenue loss for us?
Well, it's a 50, we're still paying 50%. So yes, we're,
Okay, so I guess my question is, I see Officer Leslie out directing traffic several mornings, often several mornings a week. Means we're paying for a service that we're not receiving.
so we only pay for the hours that somebody is there. And unfortunately, while we have a very consistent and dependable, dedicated crossing guard at Pine Street in Jeffrey, actually changed companies with us so that he could continue the job. It is very, very hard for us to find somebody at Westwood. Unfortunately, whether it's people coming out of the school or people wanting to go on Route 2, people are not always very friendly, nice, or make people feel safe when they step into the middle of the road. Our goal would be to not have either our school resource officer or Officer Lesky down directing traffic. That kind of defeats the purpose of the SRO. You really want them at school, on the school grounds when school is breaking up, because that can be a time of great challenge that sometimes if people just see somebody wandering, they might make better decisions. Helpful?
Yes, so my question was, and you've answered it, was our officers are filling the gap only when the contracted service is not available.
And when the contracted services are not available, I actually have, unless this council is going to change their direction, almost the entire senior team has been trained to direct traffic, because I was told very kindly they didn't want to see it empty. So if you ever see me there, that's what I'm doing.
Directing traffic.
Yeah, it'd be a bad day. Be a bad day.
What is the status of our vehicles, our police vehicles?
So we have the really cool looking new Interceptor with the really,
The one with the
It's-
dealership
it's
thing, we got it on
yeah,
last Tuesday.
we got it on Tuesday, so it's gonna head out to get, no, it was Thursday because it was the check right before Zach left.
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
Um, So that's heading out to get the inside done, and then it has to go be lettered. We would not, all of our vehicles, frontline vehicles would be lettered before we would let them out. And then the other one's supposed to be in by the end of June. Supposed to be in by the end of June. So these are the 2 hybrids
Mhm.
that we're trying out.
I drove it last week, actually.
it's interesting.
If you're happy.
I like interesting. It's better than.
Yeah, no, I can't say that, it's definitely, yeah, it works good, actually, I was impressed.
Be nice to see some fuel savings.
Yeah.
Like this, too.
So if we want to move on, if you're okay, I don't want to move anybody too quickly, but I also don't want to waste anybody's time. When we move into community policing, we have 2 full-time law enforcement officers. One is usually stationed at the school, filling a role that used to be known as the school resource officer. We don't use that moniker anymore. We use community services officer. We have 2. One of them is getting ready to go out on maternity leave shortly. Then we will be down to 1 for about 3 months. The other is our community policing, director, of community policing. It's Ed Lesky. He is incredibly focused on non-response community conflict resolution. So this is not the place that, there are some dangerous situations that you just have to keep going back to. But we were really focused on some of the conflict in the neighborhoods. There was an issue at Sailor where we had a couple of student homes that they just needed to understand how to live and be part of a community, and Ed did some facilitation there. We had another neighborhood that was plagued with some break-ins and people were scared, and so Ed went and did some education on how to be safe in your home. We had a rat-infested neighborhood that home where we were getting a lot of drug activity. Ed worked with code enforcement and life safety to help those folks understand that rat business probably wasn't a good business to have if you didn't have the wherewithal to follow all of the rules with that. They couldn't just live wildly in your home. It took us, that was an example of one that we had been punting around between code enforcement, public health, and the police department for probably 2 years. And then when we really brought this concerted, community-oriented approach, it took Ed about 6 months leading the charge, I would say, to get that one taken care of. The community policing is also part of community events. We have liaisons with various local and community groups, the University of Maine, just working very closely. Also, we have a relationship between our community policing division and the City of Bangor's division to look at homelessness and other regional issues, to how we can work together as opposed to trying to recreate the wheel in one community, which would cost an enormous amount of money. A lot of community education and outreach when a group calls and wants to know more about the police department or law enforcement, or what's allowed or not allowed, or how they could be safer in their home. Ed would take that and work with Rob St. Louis and Pat Esty and just the group. And also providing internal town operational support. And that is just what I was describing, that kind of moving along in a more task force oriented way or interdepartmental team way. We've seen a lot of improvement, but also having an opportunity to have somebody whose job it is to connect with the community is, we found, I think, some real strength with that.
Council Airway, you may see within the community policing budget, there's a $1,600 training line for them. Just not to confuse, that is specifically for them so that they can go out and get whatever they need for credentialing, if they need advanced training and dealing with cultural issues and those types of things. That's what that money is for. I mentioned community policing in the previous budget. That's to give the patrol officers more of an understanding of community policing in general, which in this area is kind of a new idea, if you will. it's been talked about, but as far as truly focusing on it and delivering it at the street level, it's not really done right now. That's the direction we're going with that.
The intent with the community policing division is not that this is where all the community policing happens, but rather that we have Ed, who is really assigned to this, to have it be a consistent push. The school resource officer works with Ed under his general direction. And the goal is eventually that Ed will spend less time in the school. Right now, the school gets one of the two, either Ed or the school resource officer.
So in the overview, it said there's a full-time presence in elementary, middle, and high schools. Is that just split up between that one full-time person's?
Yep.
schedule?
From a community policing perspective, is there any such thing as foot patrol at all these days ever by any? Not necessarily, I mean, is that a thing anymore? or-
Sure.
We have a bike patrol.
We have the
I was
bike
thinking,
patrol.
I thought we had a bike at
So,
some point. I
Yeah.
couldn't remember if I was confusing that with someplace else.
we don't do it in the winter time,
Well,
but
no.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
But
it's a
we-
bad tire.
we do have a bike and we use it quite a bit to both get out at the street level, but also to get on some of the trails. We know that from a safety perspective, just going through and making sure that people can have fun and use the trails and not get caught up in other people's bad behavior on the trails is kind of important.
Could get a horse.
So,
Hi.
and when you see the deputy chief wandering around downtown, it's not because he's lost.
I think it's because of coffee. You start there.
You ready for me to move on to what this costs, Belle? So this is $230,010. It's up about $10,175 or 4.63%. Personnel costs are entirely where that sits. And the $24,000 is, wait, I'm sorry, the contracted crossing guard is in this budget. The police one that I told you was professional services is legal, printing, our collections costs, case preparation, the animal control officer, and the animal orphanage is what made up that $20,000. This one is the contracted crossing guard.
The entire line is the contract.
I know one of them was, I apologize.
So I'm looking at a couple of these lines, we're budgeting for a lot of stuff that has seemingly never been used in at least the years that you provided here. I
So,
mean, travel, training, really policing program, we spent $25, which seemingly was for the first time, even we budgeted for $1,500.
so the community policing budget just started.
Okay.
That's not one that we have historically had. And when I look at this, we've got a couple of issues with the community policing. Travel and training, everybody has, we've all been curtailed here. Even the things we would like to do in the schools, the schools just have not, we've not had the time, that things have been canceled. When I look at materials and supplies, $1,500 goes very fast, Rob. But I hear what you're saying, but I'm trying to bring us back and hope that we can go back to what we were doing. The other issue we've had is Courtney, who is the school resource officer, has been pulled into patrol, or was until she couldn't do that anymore. Because we've been so short-staffed. So the vision is always with community policing to have the SRO or anybody else in the department in that division be able to slide in and support patrol. That's important, just because when we're down, we're down.
Plus, we're not done with our fiscal year.
No, a couple of these things I would expect uniform and protective gear, I'm gonna guess that things got coded to police because I know we've spent some money for community policing in uniform and protective gear. So if we're close to over, I'll go back and reallocate some of that money, search for the overage.
Yeah, another uniforms protective gear in the other section, we've the last couple of years only used half of what we're currently budgeted for. Which, you know, again, like it's good to budget sometimes for more than we're going to use, but I get the value of that.
We don't, uniforms and protective gear are also one of the places where if we're over in other places, we won't buy.
Yeah.
In some of the supplies, uniforms and protective gear, if we can bump it to the next year. But the goal for all of these departments is not to go in the red. We've not been able to hit that with the fire department this year, but that's always the goal. And so it means at times kind of coming back to the center and making sure that that's covered and then not going over in other places.
I guess it's not, it doesn't matter, I guess, other than this is where we're budgeting this, but if we end up using community policing officer, the SRO, for half of the year, well, actually, it must come out of the school. It's not half the year, but
About 75% of the year.
about 75%
And
is
we get
there.
reimbursed 50% of their
Okay,
wages.
yeah, I mean, is there a tracking for when we have to pull them out of that? Or we just assume close enough?
So we once had it tracked.
Yeah, sounds like
And
more work is work.
It is.
Yeah.
And understand that these are salary allocations, base salary allocations. So if they're on patrol, they're still getting paid out of this salary.
Does this mean that Ed, I mean, I assume Ed could be on patrol as well, or no, that position, I should say.
I think in general, that position could be on patrol. I think every employee has currently that position is not on patrol.
Other questions? Anyone?
Capital. So we're looking to buy one police cruiser this year. We've got capital requests in the amount of $57,155. $57,155. One police cruiser. Although I know council wants us to continue with hybrid, we are unable to get quotes for hybrid police cruisers. So this is one. Our thought is that we would shuffle around our purchase to make sure that the gas vehicle becomes the administrative vehicle, which has less miles put on it. So the thought being you could mitigate it that way. So this will move Dan's vehicle kind of through the cycle now. We have a Taser replacement in the capital budget. A counselor had a question about this, so I want to be very clear that council approved back in FY20 replacement of our Tasers. It was a one purchase, but we spread the payment out over 5 years. It's not a lease, it is just a payment plan. We have the Tasers and have been trained on the Tasers, and so we really can't give them back at this point in time. So it's $6,480 for the next 3 years, counting this year. So 3, 4, 5. The reason that we've moved to more of a, it's not a lease, but it's that idea that you pay for it over time. Tasers are usually warranted for 5 to 7 years. 5 is where they've kind of been coming down on. if your taser is not warranted, it means that if we actually activated it and were sued, we lose some of the court support that we would otherwise have from taser if it were under warranty. Court support is important to bring the scientific rationale for why it's not cruel and unusual behavior. So the tasers are kind of, I don't know that you could undo that one. The other one is last year, council approved a change out of our mobile cruiser video recording system and our body worn cameras. We've long had body worn cameras. However, we've usually shared them. So if you were number 6 or 7, you might not have one. The best practice was very clearly that everybody has one and that there is one in the spare.
Probably 2 spares.
Two
We think we have
spares.
17.
And the other piece of this that was important for us was that it automatically, there is a subscription service behind the scenes that make the downloading and the storage of those that camera footage a lot more seamless and less human footprints on it. So the less times humans touch things, the better with these kind of evidence-based. So this had its annual payments, got it broken out in the capital budget. Annual payments for five years. You approved $30,000 in year 1. And then because we were gonna have to purchase some equipment with it, and then it goes down to $22,700 a year. This year, we're only asking for $5,675 because we have not received the equipment. We've ordered it, we've purchased some of the hardware, but they have not actually started. It hasn't been installed and we haven't been using it. So if we simply carry forward the remainder of what was budgeted this year and add it to 5,675, we will have what we need to cover the cost this year. So everything kind of got bumped up 1 year. It did not make sense to me to ask for that money twice. That's it.
Ready to move on to fire?
Next question.
Sure.
So there are 8 vehicles. And we have 2 new ones coming online right around now. Is that what you just said?
So these are ones that we ordered. We didn't order the year before. We ordered these on July 1. And that was after we tried to go an extra year with only, we stretched. And so the normal cycle before we tried to stretch was ordering 2 1 year, 1 the next year, to just a 2-1, 2-1 cycle. Then we tried to stretch, we blew a motor. We tried to stretch and ended up now waiting almost a year to get these on the street. So we put a lot more mileage on the vehicles, the other vehicles. We've been short. So yes.
There's a few years of budget where I felt bad for Josh, because every time we walked in the room, it was like, and could you maybe not have any cruisers?
I'm wondering too about the new cruiser, because I think electrifying our fleet is a goal, right? Is there a way to wait until those hybrids come online instead of investing in gas powered?
So we could. I just, when I was asked to get my bids, they're not even building or pricing cars for 23 yet. They don't exist.
They don't even exist.
They don't exist. So that's the struggle. So when I talked to our dealer,
Yeah,
he said that he, realizing this COVID shortage that was cars,
right,
he pre-allocated 8 or 9 cars, knowing that when budget seasons came around, there was gonna be a massive shortage
right,
of gas cars because it was gonna be the only versions that he could get.
yeah,
And so when I reached out to him, he said, I can't give you pricing for 2023 cars like I did last year
this is a 2022.
because they don't, it just the model years. Ford hasn't released it, so Ford has it locked down because they're so far behind on production, is my understanding.
Right,
So I believe that based off the current mileage and wear and tear that I have on my car, it's the oldest car. I think as of this morning, I'm just shy of 132,000 miles on it. Got 131,600, something like that on it. That was the one we blew the motor in. It made sense to try and see what I could get in the short term. Because if I continue to wait, they were saying the middle of May,
yeah.
they might release some pricing to me, but nobody's called me saying that they have pricing on cars yet.
So do cruisers, can they be like traded in like down the road? Or like something, like, I mean, what is the future?
We've done that in years
like
past. We've done that in years past.
Yeah,
I believe that it was the council's wish to try and repurpose them throughout the town.
right,
So like my car, if we get approved for another car, it's gonna actually go to either the Public Works to have either the environmental services person or somebody reutilize it to keep it being used because there's other people in town that might use one.
I think the other thing that we were looking at too, when we looked at these vehicles, is this vehicle is when we bring it into an admin role, it doesn't get the wear and tear of a regular police cruiser.
right.
So where the police cruisers are rotated out every 3 years,
4 years.
every 4 years, we're thinking we're looking at 6 or 8 years before we have to rotate out an admin vehicle, unless there's an opportunity to get an electric vehicle or hybrid later on. So
Right,
the lifespan on this purchase would be more than what we would see in a regular patrol vehicle.
right. I guess my concern more is starting to, realize and electrify.
Right. Well, I think we're moving that way. We're making honest attempts to get
Yeah.
there with starting with hybrids because that's what's most available. Unless there's an interest in the council buying us Teslas, we certainly would engage in that discussion if you wanted to.
Well, the Tesla truck hasn't actually been.
Yeah, no, I see, it feels like a new vehicle should be more, we should be thinking more about our carbon footprint.
I think we
and getting
agree.
that off the- Yeah, I know,
We
no,
just kinda
I
had a
know,
digital
and it is, they are difficult to,
On that
okay,
point, we heard from Mitch that, which I hadn't heard this before, that the suggestion is every 3 years on those, and that you don't want to get it, like, beyond that is an issue, which I've never heard that,
I never
but I would think police cruisers, they're gonna be used more than anything is gonna be. used, so.
And I don't think you ever want to get into a place with a police cruiser where you're thinking that you're going to hold it to get value out of it. They're not going to hold the same kind of value as an admin car, even though he's using it as primary admin. We're also drilling holes in it for equipment. We're also, they sit and idle for a very long time at scenes and while running the gear.
I was just curious about what happens, like if another police department needed a car and we wanted a hybrid. I mean, if
Oh,
we,
sure.
if we had the capacity to do those kinds of trading
Yeah.
and kind of shuffling around
The
of
other
vehicles in the future.
The other thing that happens is that we don't order any vehicles until after July 1st.
Right.
And that's still time to get pricing. I'm just telling you up front, the pricing that is here is not for a 2023 electric vehicle. It's a 2022 gas. That's the only the only thing we could get, so that's why it's here.
How fuel efficient are these cruisers?
I'm sorry.
How fuel efficient are these cruisers?
Very-
I mean, they're
The
big
high-
vehicles.
The hybrid ones?
I mean, you know, the ones that are not.
I think the gas powered ones used as an admin car would be just like a Ford Explorer that you go buy off the lot. It essentially is that Ford Explorer, so it'll get about 18 to 20 miles an hour, miles per gallon, excuse me, sorry.
Miles an hour.
Yeah. But, so it is that exact same car, just like what Sophie spoke to. The difference between that car that you could go buy your significant other off the lot and the car that we're trying to buy is all the things that make an emergency vehicle, all the flashing lights, there's special wiring that needs to be ordered with it, there's
Different size alternator.
all, yeah, different size alternators and batteries, and it's different in its core. You could try and go buy a standard Explorer off the lot, but then you're gonna have to spend almost as much money, if not more, to retrofit into an emergency vehicle. So it's cheaper in the long run just to buy an emergency vehicle.
Plus we lose the fleet purchase and we just go buy a standard.
Right. Yeah, if you looked at our bid, he gave us a very good discount on the price of the car from what the MSRP was. Because
But
they're a state purchase.
absolutely, but prices are definitely going up. You're not gonna
Okay.
see a cruiser for $24,000, which 10 years ago, I was buying a Crown Vic for $24,000 for the police department.
We ordered our fire truck in November. We ordered our fire truck in November and the prices have gone up 17% since then. So, what inflation's doing right now.
So I offer the discussion items for police, not saying we have to necessarily go through all of them, but these are the things that staff thought you might want to talk about. Happy to follow your lead on this. Recruitment, retention, future staffing needs and police, we are the training ground. A lot of people like to put a couple years in, come here, get trained, and then go other places. We have an aging building. I know it feels new to many people, myself included, but we are beginning to see some major issues with the structure, as well as I would offer anybody the opportunity to take a guided tour through the public safety building, and you would see that the police department is essentially shoved into half a basement and are sitting on top of each other. With the CGIS and evidence rules and things that are changing, just in the last 10 years I've been here, we are right at kind of maximum, if not more than maximum capacity there. We're also starting to see Orono still, we like to say Orono is a bubble, and we have a very safe, welcoming kind of community, but we're starting to see more property and drug-related crimes. People should be locking their doors at night, just because if you are here, anywhere around here, you should be locking your doors at night. But that is, it creates more patrol activity and need here. At the same time, the county jail is not the resource it used to be. It can't be, especially during COVID, and now they're so short-staffed. There are times we can't take people to jail, which, while I'm not a big advocate for taking people to jail, there are some people that need to go to jail simply to access services or to provide a cooling off period, which is eating into the time that officers have here. And the big, always topic du jour is main day. I will say I've had some really positive interactions with the university, and I think we're going to see some conversations moving ahead related to main day. But for the budget, if you look in this budget, there is absolutely no specific resource for main day. Just from the town's perspective, along with upstaffing police and fire for the day, so bringing back people who are not scheduled to work, which is overtime. We also bring in the state police spider team and mobile command center, their riot, crowd control. They were very gracious in donating those services this year. They do caution us that that is not something that we should necessarily expect. But that back of the envelope from the lieutenant who normally does the billing for that would run us about $11,000. In the past, we have paid for those services through OUI grants that we would get from the state, because you can absolutely make the argument that Main Day is pretty much fueled by alcohol, or at least our response, where we are responding to. Unfortunately, those funds just are not what they used to be, number one. And number two, more and more communities are qualifying or have found them to write for them. So instead of essentially having it be, what do you need, Orono, it has turned into, well, we understand you need that, but we don't have that, so make do. So this is something that I'm hoping that we can work through with the university to reduce the need for response costs. But this budget does not include specific money for response costs.
Does the University of Maine give us any kind of reimbursement or any kind of, are they billed in any way, shape, or form for any of the things that happen on Main Day?
The University of Maine collaborates with us to try to educate students, landlords. There was one year where we did have grant funds, but we thought that, because we used to, I remember Scott Scripture had the big whiteboard where he would start in the beginning of March and start laying out all of the shifts that we were pulling from other departments, people to come in and cover shifts for us. And when that happened, we thought we were going to be overexpending a grant. I think the university offered us $700 towards that, what we thought was going to be a $3,000 approach. So the answer is I don't get money. However, I do think, like I said when we started this, that they are coming to the table willing to engage in a different way. So we might not have the issue that we are having right now. And once we get into those discussions, Chief and I will be back to talk with council about what's happening.
My other question is, does Old Town have the same level, maybe nobody knows, of events that Orono does on Main Day? I know there's a lot of students that live in Old Town. Do they have the same? Or is it, it's the bulk of it is here?
It's an Orono,
Yeah,
it's an Orono thing.
yeah,
It's not experienced anywhere else. It's my knowledge.
just curious.
Other questions? We can move on.
I can't tell, Rob,
Yeah.
I can't read you yet to see if you have a question or not.
I want you to guess.
All right, that sounds good. So on to the fire department. The fire department has 22 full-time people. We have 20 response personnel. That's 4 shifts of 5 each. A deputy chief will be sitting down at the end of the table, and our chief. We provide 24-hour, 7-day-a-week response, emergency medical services, which we do with 2 ambulances, also providing ALS backup to a variety of departments, including the university UVAC on campus. We have a plethora of emergency management when the storms come in, especially ones that knock out power, the big windstorms that create havoc with infrastructure. Chief stands up the EOC. We also run our mandated public health services out of the fire department. Chief and I work usually together on those. We have a regional hazmat response team. I'll let Chief talk more about that, and we actually have a hazmat budget that we can dive into that with. But we provide response to Penobscot County. They give us a significant amount of money. And well, let me frame that. They give us more money than anybody else, but still not enough. How's that? We also, we often get called up by Maine Emergency Management to travel anywhere in the state. I think Waterville is the next closest unit. We do life safety inspections and fire safety educational program that the fire department oversees. We have the 2 engines, the 2 ambulances, the 1 tower, or for those of us who are not linguistically on board, the ladder truck. We have the special ops vehicle, which was actually purchased by the state and lives in our barn that is for hazmat. We have the pickup truck, the rescue boat, and 2 administrative vehicles. One is the old cruiser, and the other one is the new red truck that we just got after many months. So the fire department's budget is $2.6 million. Next slide, please, Bill. $2.6 million. 2.3 is personnel costs. So the fire department has 5 people on at any one time. If we drop, if somebody calls in sick or is on vacation or has to go to training, we are filling that shift because 5 is the minimum staffing level that Chief and I are comfortable with, and even then is skating, in my opinion.
Not quite, yes.
So when you look at this department, we have approved the contract here, so these are actual personnel costs. The issue that we ran into here, and I think Megan alluded to it earlier, we did a whole presentation with council in executive session prior to negotiating. We were so far under what everybody else is being paid. Every firefighter that works for us is required to be paramedic trained. We give them 3 years to get to that level. And the reason that that is so important is with only 5 people on a shift, and you're booking, if somebody books out, we've got to have a paramedic backfilling that, or else you could end up in a situation where we wouldn't be able to meet minimum staffing required for the paramedic service. We provide EMS services to the town of Vesey under a contract. And like I said, we back up some other communities. Our personnel costs increased $206,000. Some of that was in payroll. One of the places that we struggle is in overtime. We have applied for a SAFER grant to test whether or not we can actually save money in the long run by putting more people on shift. When you think about it, if somebody books out sick on a regular 8-hour day, you're paying 8 hours of overtime. Somebody books out sick for a shift in the fire department and you're paid 24 hours of overtime. The overtime goes up very quickly. And it's been asked in the past if we could staff down for certain times of the day, and we've brought out graphs, charts and graphs that demonstrate there is no time of the day, even statistically, not just from a standpoint of when you have an emergency, you want somebody to come. The sick coverage and vacation coverage and training wages here are related to overtime. Those are the costs, those are overtime costs. Our health insurance is going down. We've had some pretty significant significant change in the department. So we're having, when you bring younger people on, thank you Obamacare. They're covered by their parents' insurance, which means that we are not having to cover them, at least for the first few years that they're here, which is great. Workers' compensation is up significantly. Primarily, it's two factors there. One is the payroll increase. When payroll goes up, comp is based on your payroll. But the other is our percentage. We're at 8% of payroll right now as our basic premium factor, which is a significant, that's a high, we have a high moderating in the fire department right now.
Question, Sophie. If we are successful in the SAFER grant and are able to hire with this grant funds additional staff, you would add one person each of the teams.
No, we would actually, I think the plan would be to have, it's 3 that we're going for, and they would be floaters, correct, Jeff?
That's, yeah.
I believe that's what we said. Yes.
So a floater allows us to look at where the vacancies are and plug people in based on that. By contract, we can't do that like on the flip of a switch. We have to plan ahead for it. But oftentimes the union has been great when they see a problem, when we've had a floater in the past, allowing us to flip around and change shift. But the goal would be, Tom, that we would see increases in the base pay, but we would really begin to draw those.
I mean, we're spending about $175,000 between unscheduled overtime, sick leave coverage, and vacation coverage.
Yep.
That's a huge.
It is, that's why we think 3 floaters won't take it all away, but would significantly reduce that. So the test that we took to council, or the hypothesis that we took to council when we thought about applying for that grant, and that's 100% over 3 years.
It's 100% over 3 years, right?
3 years, no match.
So actually, I need to correct you on what you just said. We have a floater position currently,
But it's
and
in,
the intent was to bring in the 3 new people that carry 1 extra per shift.
That's what I-
so the floater is just permanently assigned to our person's shift who is on long-term medical.
That's good.
Gotcha. Okay, I'm sorry. I've just seen the shifts and they didn't look like a floater. So the goal would be when somebody is out, you don't have to fill. The only time you would have to is if you had people call in sick or somebody was on vacation and somebody called in sick. We don't allow 2 vacations at the same time. So
No, that's if we can find people to fill those positions too, right? I'm seeing one of the areas of concern that have been listed is recruitment and retention. What
absolutely.
do you think the causes of that? And we've talked about that a little bit.
Boy, that's a whole conversation of
Don't mean
itself.
to open up a can of worms.
To put it in a very tiny nutshell, one of it is a change in the belief of the workforce. There isn't a draw to a job that has benefits and good wages and such as much as they're used to, number one. Number two, it's an aging workforce in this area where we don't have the pool of people that maybe Southern Maine has. So part of what we're doing through the negotiation process is trying to attract some of those people to come up here by doing away with residency requirements and those types of things. The other thing is, there's a lot of publicity out there about the dangers of the job and things as they relate to cancer and stuff like that. And that I think has a bit of a negative effect. And I'll tell you, probably from my perspective, the biggest thing of all is there's no clear pathway when you come in the door to achieve certification and whatnot. And we're actually doing something about that next door now. So previously, it's always been, if you want to come to work for us, you need to have these things. Well, that's not the mindset of people anymore. It's, if you want me to work for you, then train me to where you want me to be. I think that's right. I mean, that's the new approach. So we're bringing people in now that don't have that basic EMT license that we used to require. They've got just minimum firefighting. We have to build them up and get them to where they need to be. So I think those are some of the bigger stumbling blocks. But it's a whole. If you want to sit down one day and have a 3-hour conversation with me, I'm sure we could. But
I'm talking to my dad about it. He said he's been a firefighter his whole life. So I've seen a lot of changes in talking about this stuff. And I have a deep respect for all the work you all are doing.
thank you.
The thing that Chief isn't talking about that's pretty amazing from our fire department is they are now reaching out to UTC, United Technology Center, and really looking at how can we get this profession in front of high school students. Like, you've got to get them excited about it at high school and middle school. It also tends to be very generational. And that's when everybody thinks that the only way to graduate with success is to go to college. That's been kind of, everything is kind of tracked in that direction, which is really harming municipal jobs in general. And so we're working.
Yeah, we want our people to be educated and have college degrees, but that's not necessarily what you need to get in the door. And if we can support them through the door and then bolster them along, that's what we want to do. So,
So the SAFE grant you said is 100% pays for those positions for 3 years? And Tom just mentioned we pay it's 175,000. I assume 3 FTEs are close to all in are going to.
Well, they are that.
And it's not going to, well, we'll see if it takes away the spend there, but that's kind of an experiment.
So, I mean, one way to look at this is we are going to be about $280,000 over budget this year in the police department, in the fire department, and almost all of that is overtime wages.
So we budgeted 175 and we're coming into it.
No. We did not budget 175 last year. We're budgeting 175
this year.
for next year, beginning July 1st. We budgeted 916, that's 25, 7. We budgeted 33 and $34,000 less than 175
This year.
We're
this
coming
year,
into it.
current year.
The other driver in that too is personnel, but it's also equipment breakdowns, repair, the ladder truck.
So
stuff
the
like that.
phrase vendor increase was all over this fire department budget.
Yeah.
Vendor increase. Anyway. Yeah, with the question of the safer grant, 175. At the end of the day, if you're going to be paying that much money for overtime and sick and holiday coverage, but you're stressing your employees out because there aren't enough people to work, I'd rather spend that much money to have more than enough people so that nobody was burning out or quitting because of how stretched thin it would be. I mean, I would love it if this grant were a magic cure to saving a bunch of money in the fire department, but the reality of it is that it's more likely for the benefit of retention, morale, safety, quality of life, which are all very important things.
Ready to,
Are we talking about EMS?
we can.
I have a
Go for it.
question.
What's your
So I was
question?
reading an article in the paper about Old Town the other day, and I'm very curious. So, for the benefit of the public who may not have read this article, about how many calls Old Town was having to take in its outer region that it services and charges fees for. And I recall having conversations in years past about times that we have been called to cover Old Town while Old Town was covering out in other far-flung communities that pay for its services. And the conversation in this newspaper article was about Old Town or the region having an EMS, regional EMS. How would something like that impact Orono?
So I can't answer that question because for two reasons. Number one, I was shocked to see the article come out. There's been no discussion in relation to regionalization with Old Town between us. And two, I don't think regionalizing just EMS is feasible for this area. I think it has to be a bigger discussion and bigger, has to be more involvement. So I don't know what drove that article, but it's nothing that we're involved with or that I'm aware of if there's conversations happening with Old Town.
There are other conversations.
There-
Very kind of theoretical, how do we work together kind of way.
There are conversations looking at that bigger picture like I talked about. But like Sophie said, they are theoretical, just barely coming out of the crawl stage. And I don't know, you can imagine that there's a lot of politics involved in that and a lot of things intertwined. Excuse me. I don't know where any of that will go, but it is being looked at.
That was interesting.
Where did you read it?
Thank you, David.
Yeah.
Did it come today?
No.
No,
No, last
Friday. I think.
Was that in response to Bradley's 100% increase?
Yes.
Okay, I think I read that.
Quick question on Easy.
Yeah.
Is that just we bill per month? Is that how that works or?
It sure is. So we had a very lengthy conversation with VZ when a while after I got here, because we were actually paying them for the privilege of responding to their EMS calls under contract.
Good.
We flipped that around. We did approach them asking for a flat fee, much like Old Town does. Ultimately, we decided that this is a very long-standing relationship between Orono and VZ, and we charge right now $225 a call, plus we get all of the billables for that. You will be seeing a contract coming in place hopefully pretty soon between the town of Orono and Old Town with regard to us responding to their contract communities. So we respond to Old Town without charging them under mutual aid, but we've changed that.
Second question, is volume significantly higher over this past year? I swear every day I hear
It is.
truck going across
We're up
the bridge.
70 calls so far. We're up about 70 calls. We're 70 calls ahead of where we were last year.
Last year at this time.
Yeah, and summer's just getting started, which, believe it or not, even with the university students, we see an uptick in.
Calendar, you count your calls on a calendar basis, not a fiscal year basis. Usually, are you ahead on a calendar or fiscal year?
We're
right
ahead
now?
on a calendar. Yeah.
Plus 7. And was last year significantly up compared to previous years or no?
I think we were.
We took a dip.
A little bit there.
Really?
What's causing it?
I think people getting out, moving around more than they have done over the last couple of years.
We have, it's interesting too, because, at candidates night, when we used to have it in person, I used to sit back here, and the one time I would say anything is when people would get up and talk about how college students are driving our EMS costs. That is actually driven more towards our older population. And every once in a while, it will spike at some of the congregate living environments where we have to go in and explain that we're not really here to help lift people back up, that's something that they should do. but I'm not really seeing the lift assist
It's
as
because I
much.
started charging them.
So the other thing, we seem to be also running a significant number of fire calls, both on campus and in our mutual aid communities. So, something to think
Just
about.
for perspective, because I have no idea. When you say plus 70 on almost for half a year. What is, how many approximately in half a year?
In half a year total.
Yeah,
So, well, we run right around 1,400 a year, so divide that in half,
1,400, okay.
somewhere in that neighborhood. between 12 and 14.
That's total.
So
That's total.
Yeah.
It's 74%, a little over 74% of our volume is medical.
So you're almost up to 20%.
thank you.
Are we ready to move on to capital requests? Just trying to be mindful of time. I don't want to push anybody too fast. So this year, we have $175,000 in capital requests, $48,000 for an administrative vehicle for the chief. I'm sure he'd love to take you for a ride in his buggy that he has right now. We have been working at bringing in a portion of fire hose every year. It's actually better than all the hose at once, because when you bring all the hose in at once, when it all starts to go, it goes all at once. So it's better to have it come in pieces. This year, Chief and I did some discussion, same thing for the self-contained breathing apparatus. Our thought is, out of the 5-year cycle, it would make sense to have Hazmat pick up a year. So we're gonna have Hazmat Reserve pick up $17,000 for hose and SCBA. The public safety building assessment, that is the assessment that council approved. When you approved it, you knew that we were a little over budget. That 10,000 brings in, we had $25,000 budgeted. It came in at 35,000. So the 10,000 is to finish that project. And I have starred the public safety building upgrades. It's 100,000. That is one that we could use our ARPA money for based on the new rules. We're not 100% sure. We're gonna know what the upgrades are, what the repairs are based on the assessment of the building. We're pretty sure that the heating and ventilation system is one of the items that is gonna have to be addressed first.
100%.
Now, when you say public safety building upgrades, would these be things that are separate from the concerns discussed during the police budget around space usage? And so would any of that cover any of those problems or no?
So this assessment is supposed to look at the current systems and structure of the building. So are there things that need to be fixed in this 25-year-old building? Then it also looks at space. Currently, how are we using our space? Both services have changed a lot in the last 25 years in terms of best practices and what we should be doing. Is there a way to better allocate our space? Is the building adequate for what we're trying to do? Those questions all have kind of different answers and honestly different priorities. The first priority, which is what we're trying to deal with here, are, Dan wants his sergeants to be above 52 in the winter. Chief would like to,
Be about 52 all year round.
well, yeah, so we clearly have some major issues. And also, when you get the work that is happening over there in a system that does not have really good ventilation, that is not good. And we really saw that during COVID as a concern. So this is a placeholder. We don't know, we're not gonna have the results of that until September, probably. And at that point, we come back to council with, this is what we're seeing, this is what we agree with, this is what we don't, because we get that in those reports. And then kind of create a master plan for where to go with that.
And would you also include in those, that kind of master plan, things like solar panels, or, you know, those kinds of upgrades?
All that kind
Getting
of stuff.
into- Yeah, okay, some savings. as well.
Green grants.
Green grants.
Green grants, so depending, so we're coming up on the end of one administration. We're in a path that would tell me that we would continue to have some green grant money for municipal buildings. But November will be kind of the tell there.
I'm interested, what are we looking at for an administrative vehicle?
It would be a sister vehicle to what Dan is proposing.
Although
What happens to the budget?
I hope it goes to the scrap
silver. I just want you to open the door so you can enjoy the door, nothing.
We're calling it antique and.
yard. Well, it's a 2016, so it looks like an antique, it drives like an antique.
Sophie, can you explain to me how something that is potentially going to be funded through ARPA funds appears in our budget? Like, does it go out, is that fit into what we use to determine our mill rate, or take that out?
So you can do it in one of two ways. I will tell you the way I think our council chair would prefer it to be. I think our council chair would prefer, I have ARPA fund, so all the money is accounted for in a separate place. And we could simply create an ARPA budget, much like the Hazmat or WPCF budget. Those are separate funds. So when you look, you wouldn't see the $100,000 as a capital expense. It would instead be a different order that is approving X to be spent out of the ARPA fund. I think Councilor Perry enjoys that way of doing it.
Well, it's not just about it. I mean, like, it's neat, but also I think of the average citizen who will look at this budget, not having the benefit of our experience or the time we spent talking about it, and they'll just say, oh my gosh, I can't believe you spent all this money on that thing. And, well, actually, we didn't. We used grant money. But I mean, I think it's more transparent for the public to see it laid out that way. But I understand why.
And if people would prefer, when it comes to, we could take the line of capital right off the capital that is not funded by general fund taxes, right off of that and adopt a capital budget that looks just a little bit different than the way we've been doing it. But we could absolutely do that, which would make it net, which is what we had before.
I know, we're not getting into that, but that's fair. I think it's disorienting, and I think I do agree with the ARPA funds kind of holding them separate, but I think in any other budget I've seen, you've got expense and you've got revenue. Valid point. I don't know who's looking even at that level, expense level publicly. Some people probably are, and to go trace it down over revenues, it's complicated, but not showing like, again, this whole College Heights and Chapel Road, we're spending, I don't know, $750,000 and it's nowhere in our budget. I think it's not a good way to do it personally, but that's a bigger discussion, not that relevant for what we're talking about, but I think it's what you're just going back to and saying that. So I guess I just personally weigh in. I'm not supportive of that.
I think I look at the ARPA funds differently because they're one-time funds.
Right.
And we're spending them on one-time expenses. So we're not going to see that revenue again, and we're not going to see that expense again.
So when
I
I
can see it.
put it into our financial software, I break all of that down into the separate funds. And Zach would be really appreciative if we just approved it that way, because otherwise we're chasing revenue to match expense. So yeah, that we can do that. Yeah. So we're ready to move on. So I think we've hit almost all of the potential discussion items except the perennial discussion of adding the public health nurse that has come up in discussion. So I would say, I understand that back in 2007 or 8, when the decision was made, we had a public health nurse that was a town employee. Decision was made to eliminate that position. And there were some real reasons for that. Public health nurse, especially with HIPAA, becomes a little problematic. There is a level of paramedicine that you can, you could talk just real briefly about.
Sure. Maine EMS has authorized what's known as a community paramedic. And that position would serve many of the roles that the public health nurse would normally serve. That position would go out and assist with bandage changes if it was needed. They would go out and assist people with medication dosing if they were having issues. They can do breathing tests and treatments for people that need it. They do certain mental health checks. They facilitate communication between primary health care or other providers for the patient. They keep records just like a nurse would. All of those on-site visit type things. In addition, they can serve in roles supporting like CDC or other health organizations like a public health nurse would. The benefit to this is that it's a cheaper program to run where it's not a nurse that's involved in it. It doesn't need to be a firefighter per se. It can be just a paramedic specially trained to do public health nursing. Community paramedicine. And there's an added benefit that some of the duties of that person could be rolled in to support its operations in the fire department as well. So I think if this is something that the council wanted to pursue, it's something that we could get more information on and bring back. We absolutely have to be an individual that does it. We couldn't do it with on-duty fire staff. I wouldn't even propose hiring somebody to do it from the fire department at an overtime rate or anything. It's really a specialized program that we have to either hire for or send somebody to school for to be able to perform these functions.
Can I ask why it's an absolute no to do it with existing staff? As far as the training, I mean, obviously, that we just talked a lot about, we are training our people, we have to train them.
Sure.
Paramedics or what.
So this person has appointments they have to keep. So if I need to be at your house at 10 o'clock to change your bandage from a wound or whatever the case may be, if I'm on duty and I have to go to a fire call, I'm going to miss that 10 o'clock appointment. Or if you have to have a diabetic check or any of those things, it's almost like keeping clinic hours, if you will, house calls and stuff.
I don't know anything about, I've never used a public health nurse. I don't know what they do. Does your insurance pay for this? Or,
I
like
always
your
wondered the same
health
thing
insurance?
about a public health nurse, and I was like, growing up in Massachusetts, I literally never heard of that. And then when I worked for the state of Massachusetts as a contact tracer, the entire reason I had a job was because the local boards of health in communities in Massachusetts had been so severely underfunded for 30+ years that they were not equipped to handle the public health emergency with COVID. And that's why the nonprofit I worked for got a contract for a temporary period of time to perform those duties in a public health emergency where the population is much, much, much higher, obviously. But because the local public health nurse was just like a person with no funds, nothing, they were not doing record keeping properly. There was no outreach possible to handle the emergency that happened with COVID. And so they had to
hire somebody.
so it's interesting. I think in a place that's really population dense, I get it. I never quite got it as much up here, but then again, I don't know.
And we've been without one since 2005.
2000, yeah, it was in the 7-8. There was one in the 07 annual report and not in the 08 annual report.
I would really like to keep talking about this. I'd really like to talk about it in terms of our DEI work, because I think providing equity of health services is part of our mission. But I don't see a place in this budget within cost constant that somebody would felt that. But I don't want to.
I'd like to know more about it,
Yeah.
because if it is something we should spend money on, then we should spend money on it, but I don't know enough about it to start having that conversation like Jeff said about this budget.
And I also think we would want to have conversations with Bangor Public Health, who is our regional public health provider, and the state of Maine, just to understand it more. But if it was purely a municipal service, we are structurally, paramedicine fits in better with what we're trying to do than standing up a whole different division. And that structure is important. I mean, the EMS and the paramedic response that we have under statute is formally a separate entity because of HIPAA laws and things like that. So it's I think complex. I think some people want to bring back kind of the nostalgia of the public health nurse. I think if that's important, we should absolutely have a conversation, but I don't think it could look the same as it did before. I think it would be different.
Full disclosure, I did ask about it. It's one of the things we talked about.
I wasn't gonna.
So I mean,
Nobody never outs anyone for their questions.
It's gonna add to it.
well, right. So in my interest is around our aging population, and in my head, that's primarily what our community nurse, I remember when she was here, obviously, and I think that's what she did. And I think going from 0 to something, even if we were to consider doing it with staff, is something. I hear what you're saying. But I have to assume that we have elderly people missing appointments to go get a bandage changed and all that stuff. So, okay, we don't get there at 10 o'clock, we get there at 10 o'clock the next day. And I don't know what the legalities are there, but I'd love to have the conversation further as these guys have said, I guess.
So there's a couple things that you should know. Number one is we do commit ambulances longer than we should dealing with some of the issues that some of the seniors have. I don't mean that negatively. I mean, they're meant to be emergency response vehicles. So if I'm at Sophie's house because she's a senior and I'm trying to help her navigate through an issue, then the other ambulance has to run a call or what have you. So there's a, I don't want to say a burden on service, but there's a higher demand on the service when we take those calls on. The other thing that's important to understand is that, yes, there is training, but community paramedicine has to be licensed by the state of Maine. So we have to, if we're going to be doing it, then we have to say, yes, we're going to meet these parameters. And if part of those parameters are keeping schedules for appointments, then we have to keep those schedules. The other thing is, and because we are we aren't out in the public all the time and whatnot, we have a pretty rigorous work schedule, believe it or not, through the day. So we're going to talk about hazmat and stuff, but we spend hundreds of hours every year training for all the missions that we're required to perform. And to pull somebody off the line when they should be doing confined space rescue training or rope training to go and do a bandage change or check somebody's sugars or do a counseling will result in them missing that training. So now I either have to bring them back on overtime to get the training, or they just don't get it, which hurts the system. So we're really adding, when we talk about doing that, we're really adding complexity to the organization, adding a whole new program to the organization that I'm not sure that we can absorb.
So from my perspective, if at some point in the future we continue the discussion, I'm interested in what services are currently provided in the existing system. I know there's post-operative follow-up that happens. Now, without a public health nurse, a nurse or physical therapist or whatever, comes to people's houses.
And
From the town?
No,
No.
from the hospital,
Right, as a
or
service.
from the
The-
practice that you're
The
working with.
state of Maine has a public health nurse system
Yes.
that deals with, I know, new mothers, but I'm sure others as well. So we're gonna mark this down as
Yep.
an item to just kind of sit on the side with.
Sure.
It's nice that people are passionate about it.
Yeah.
And I actually got a text from a citizen watching who says community paramedicine is definitely the way to go. Somebody who wants to be a paramedic. but-
Where did you find this citizen?
So there are two more items. One is a fire protection fee, which I think we've talked briefly about, but just because it's part of this budget. This budget has an increase of approximately $36,000 associated with an estimated increase in the Orono Water District's fire protection fee. And as we talked about, this is not based on the town's use, but rather all municipalities that have public water supplies or districts within them are required to pay a fee based upon, it's either 30% of operating budget, or if they go through the process of making the bell curve and doing the science to determine what the additional cost was to build a system that can support hydrants and fire flow as opposed to just potable water. And that is not something we can negotiate. People can go, council could go and weigh in on the fire protection fee during the district's process. If this comes in less, if as they move forward before the end of June, it looks like it's going to be less, I would of course show that in this budget. The last, oh, go
I
ahead.
have to go. I just wanted to say thank you all for coming. I apologize for having to leave the conversation a little early, but well. Thanks, Rob.
And then the last budget we have that's part of public safety is hazmat. So this budget is $39,500. It's based on agreements through Maine Emergency Management and Penobscot County. In addition to this, we also get a $15,000 a year grant, or have gotten a $15,000 a year reimbursement grant that you guys approve every July 1st. But the $39,500 is the local money. 32,000 of that comes from Penobscot County, split between their organized and unorganized budgets. University of Maine gives us $7,500. We get the MEMA grant, and then the Orono Fire Department provides a lot of in-kind administration and operations. And I think hazmat is a place where we can really highlight the fact that the Orono Fire Department is not like other departments in this region. When somebody comes in, not only do we expect them to be EMS trained by the time we get there, they have to be hazmat trained to the next level. And I always get technician and operations technician. They swift water rescue, cold water rescue, confined space, rope rescue. We have a very diverse set of services here. And if we provide a service, we have to train on the service frequently, or else we run the risk of safety, which is most important. Then secondary would be failure to train if anybody is injured. So this is a unique department, and I hope that we can, that people can acknowledge that. if nothing else.
Can you tell me, are our increased workers' comp fees at all tied with our ability to practice the services?
I don't think we have anything that is related to hazmat. I think one of the issues that you run into in both police, fire, and public works, to some degree, we don't have as many injuries in public works right now, is the idea that can't come back to duty until you can pull your weight. I can't take we can do light duty sometimes, but light duty with somebody who can't lift 5 pounds is really non-existent duty. And so when we're looking at, we've had a couple of really large claims. We've had a few very, very large claims. We spend a lot of time talking about mental health, but if you look at just the trends, both state and national trends around first responders and PTSD claims, those are going. We have people, and I don't mean my current staff, I mean people in general in the world, who simply, number one, you see a lot of stuff, bad stuff, when you do these jobs, and you take that with you, and the stiff upper lip and let's put it aside doesn't solve the problem long term. It just sits there. And so yeah, we spend time and money trying to figure out how to give people tools to be able to deal with what they see when they see it and not let it pull in. But I also know that those claims are very expensive. And they are no different than falling and breaking a hip or needing surgery because whatever. It's just because it's not a broken bone, but they are really expensive.
Is it MEMIC or is it a special
No,
organization?
so Maine Municipal Association actually provides our workers' comp. It's not typical insurance, it's group funded. We have the part that's tough, and Jeff heard this when he first came in, because when you see high mod ratings, you immediately go to best practice and are they doing what they're supposed to be doing? And we actually are hailed as one of the top tier performers in the MMA workers' comp pool. We actually have state shape certification through the Bureau of Labor in the fire department. We just got it for the next 5 years. So, 3 years. So we spend an awful lot of time here on workers' comp, but somebody falls out a window and tears their shoulder apart, you've got to put it back together. You don't have a choice. Or rips everything in their knee, or what if there's heart problems.
A little too Pollyannish, I guess, to think that is, because it's a high risk thing, obviously. So to think, and it is, maybe municipal does it, I guess, but is it just kind of feels like someone should take that burden because that burden's there, and I guess no one's going to start.
Well, and for a very long time, I think Tom's the only one that has actually heard the annual gathering where I was touting experience ratings of 0.6, 0.7, which is unheard of. And we cycled through that, and now we're cycling through a 1.2, 1.3, 1.6. And now we're hoping to come down on the other side, but it stays with us for 3 years.
Anything else on fire?
Nothing else is on fire.
Any other information that?
None. Any other information requests about this? So my thought, if we're gonna think about the next, so we come back together on the 2nd of June. I have payroll stuff set up. I have a couple of different ways to look at the, people keep talking about the $900,000 increase in operations. So I'm trying to slice that in other ways for you to be able to look at that $938,000 different, or $983,000 differently than by department. I'm trying to pull out some cost centers that might help a little bit with some of your decision making. If you come up with anything specific that you want to see that would help, let me know. Payroll is a big issue. We're gonna tackle general government, which does not tend to be a huge department. So I'm thinking I would actually start the day with a presentation on payroll and our HR, our personnel expenses. Kind of tackling to that, so you could take a look at where those costs are coming from.
And has that ARPA money been rolled into that 900,000? So like if you take 100,000 off, like, you know, like we were talking about.
Yeah, that is not part of
Okay.
it. So that would be my thought, and I want to probably work with Tom just a little bit more on some scenarios. And then finish up the general government piece. I haven't heard a lot of feedback from folks, so now would be the time that I usually would have department heads starting to work on the what if scenarios, and I haven't heard any of that. We're gonna have a pretty short turnaround between the 2nd, which is a Thursday, and then the following Monday, you're gonna do your final review and give me direction for the budget that I'm gonna present on the 13th. So I don't wanna push, my job is not to push, it is to help support. But if there are things that I could be looking at or give people direction to start thinking about, that would be important. And if folks are more comfortable just emailing me some of those ideas, we could tag those on to the end of the discussion, maybe on the 2nd.
Or another way to frame that is, what you wouldn't necessarily want is for us to have budget hearing after budget hearing where everyone's relatively quiet, no one asks you for any big changes. And then we get to the end and folks say, no, not this budget, that's too much money. Because,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, that would be more complicated.
I mean, that's one of the things where, and I remember the year that council told me they wanted to see 200,000 out, 400,000 out, $800,000 out. I remember that. And I gave you like tier 1, 2, 3. The part that's difficult, and I remember when Councilor Maynard was on council, she always used to bring up brush cleanup because nobody else does it. And at the end of the day, taking out brush cleanup would save about $700 out of the budget. So that's kind of the key is, and so much of it is interrelated. Like if you want this to change, there might be impact over here. But ultimately, we say it all the time, council's the one that determines the service level, not staff's job is to help you understand how to get there. So just let me know what I should be helping you understand.
No more sidewalks on. I'm just kidding.
Can I, if you'd like to be murdered in your bed, Cheryl Robertson, then by all means.
That's funny.
Sorry, I was just kidding.
That was a joke. Everyone, she was joking. She did not mean that.
So we are not scheduled to be back together until June 2nd at 5 p.m. Monday, next Monday is actually a holiday. It's Memorial Day. I do have 2 pieces of interesting information for council. The first is that Ayers Island has sold. Staff is working with the new owner on a redevelopment plan. So we should have some pretty cool stuff to bring to you. And the other is just to let you know at the planning board meeting a couple of weeks ago, last week, we permitted our first marijuana grow facility in the tech park. So that will be a new facility in the tech park, which.
On Arizona.
No, the tech park. But so to the point of revenue coming in, I think we are trying to help capitalize on some of that.
If you haven't seen enough budget work lately, you can go to the school department's public meeting tomorrow night at 6 o'clock in their new auditorium. I think I'll go just so I can see the auditorium. But that's happening tomorrow night.
And I think the person who did all the work should make the announcement.
We just received notice that we got the MMA grant for some slip trips and fall hazard type equipment. So
Nice.
it was a zero match. 2,991, something like that. So just under $3,000.
Great.
Good money. Okay.
Okay. Anything else for us, Sophie? Then motion to adjourn?
Moved.
Thank you, Val.
And we are off.
Thanks, Ellen. See you tomorrow, I promise.